Good evening, everyone. I know it's been a bit of a delay on this one here, and to be frankly honest, I would say the negotiation side of things. When I think about my previous um, experience with it, at first I didn't think I really had much to offer. I was just I I have much regret when it comes to some negotiations in terms of negotiating salary or trying to figure out how payouts would work for a certain situation. But as we started to write down a list of certain things, it dawned on me that hey, maybe I know a little bit more than what I thought. So what I would like to do is go down this line of points that I had created earlier and put up on the discussion channel. And so I'm going to talk about some of my experiences and maybe some tips that you can hopefully take advantage of or use, or some hindsight that you can take advantage of that I did that you won't have to, or at least have at least an idea of how to combat in the future. So we'll talk about that good stuff. And as usual, is my drawing? Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out this little vertical takeoff thing. I call it the mosquito. So I got to get to the other unit. So that's like gonna be the landing unit for it. So two things I think I'm gonna build it in. At first I was thinking I could use 3D coat to make the building of it, but I was looking again. It's actually a really good shape that you could use a tool like plasticity to use with it. Now, a 3D coat I could probably just draw it out. And then they want me to actually show and produce that class a little bit coming the next semester. So we'll see what happens with that. But long story short, I'm going to actually build this thing here. I was looking at some other new tools that are coming out here. There's a virtual reality tool it's been out for a while. It just so happens that Adobe recently purchased it. It used to be called Gravity Sketch. I forget what they call it now, but nevertheless, it's still Gravity Sketch to me. Might play with that a little bit, and let's see what happens. But anyway, we're talking about our setup here. So anyway, when you're talking about your ownership or negotiation in indie games, IP is key to everything. Ownership of it, ownership of your intellectual property, full ownership versus shared ownership. That's something to look into, and to also make sure that you determine it's very important, because that's going to pretty much limit what you can or how you can operate or navigate certain situations. When it's a shared ownership, that typically means you need the graces of that other owner, unless you have a majority stake within it setup. So make sure that you have some clarity on what that is and who retains what. That is very specific and very important to point out, especially when you're starting out. Um, you really don't want to have that type of endeavor sour any type of potential business relationships. So just something to be aware of. And yeah, I think that's really just a good thing to have in mind as you're going along with this. So let's see here. Yeah, so another thing on that one is the licensing of it. A good I explain explanation is that folks, they love to want to get on the AAA title and work with the group of it. Like, let's not mention any names, Marvel, but you would take some of those type of situations, and you think when you see about how much of the money, the licensing of a certain product is going to take from the actual production, which then makes it wonder if the juice is worth the squeeze. If the IP owner is not doing any of the work, but yet gets 60% of the proceeds, that better be one hell of a seller for it to make to make it worthwhile for the person that's actually doing the production work. Those are things that really take in consideration. And when I look at the scope of how things are, let me actually pull this down. When I look at the scope of how entertainment or how they're finding entertainment, it's really changing out. Like, for instance, when I went to Kid Screen last year, one of the things that you used to be able to do at Kid Screen is that you would have these pitch rooms. And one that I found odd about last year in particular, and at first I thought maybe it was COVID, was that no one was really in them. Now you had like some um, some activity, but but it wasn't bustling, and typically it would be packed. Like if you never could just walk into the pitch room lounge and just grab a sofa and have your lunch. That was something I could do freely, and it was like it was the first opening since I was saying since COVID, I think. There was still a good amount of people there, but it was more people looking for. I think the term that we heard a lot was called the next baby shark. So the groups out here, they're really looking for these established groups that have an intellectual property, that has a following, that has some buzz behind it in terms of either like subscribers. That's the new thing these days, which makes me think about um, something like new media, and how that new media really affects how you can go about navigating and showing your work, or sharing your work out there. It's just one of those things to really consider about. Let me pull that up. So yeah, licensing is one of those things you think about on a third party situation. Famous brands or series. Like I said before, I mentioned no names. I think one of the more interesting ones these days is Lord of the Rings. I don't know how much more they can get out of that turnip. It'll be very interesting to see how where it goes. Uh, just as a thought point, ensure terms are favorable and don't restrict your creative freedom too much. Those are the things you really don't want to do. You really don't want to give up if you're going to sell off right to do certain things. Like Eastman and Laird, when they first made Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, those original comic books were very different than what ended up being what folks love or revere these days. And that's not to say that you didn't back then. It just so happens that it was just a bit more raw. They it was the innuendo is that they smoked weed and read certain and read girly mags. That was kind of one of their things. It was as one of the original Ninja Turtle setups. And obviously, that really doesn't sell to the worldwide or kid audience that they were trying to go for there. So obviously, that had to change out, and for the better. When you look at something like Ninja Turtles, they've made more money actually as a franchise than Marvel has. Look that up. That's very interesting. Um, just so go so to show and go to think about it. When you have an intellectual property and when you sell it, and you think about Eastman and Laird, the original creators of TMNT, they don't get really a large share of any of that. Those rights and properties were sold long, long ago. So I'm pretty sure they enjoyed the money when they initially sold over top of it. But I'm hoping that there's some investment in there as well for them. But anyway, that's just something to really think and consider. You really never know where it's going to go. So especially when it comes to your licensing, really think about that one, okay? And also have a lawyer. Don't just do that yourself and think you're going to be good to go. Make sure you have a lawyer in that situation. And if you have friends, if you're a group of friends and you're in it together to make this game, you make this awesome game. In order to keep your friendships, make sure you each have lawyers that can argue for you. So when you guys get together, you're not arguing or talking about the situation at hand or who gets what share and all that type of crap. You let your lawyers do that shit. You stay friends. That's the type of thing that will destroy a friendship, and you really don't want to do that, especially when it's the type of friendship that you can make some good stuff. Okay, you really want to go through this enjoying the people that you make it with, as well as enjoying the product that you make. All right, so really that really quickly turns into revenue sharing and royalties and understanding how the revenue shared up, whether 70-30, 50-50, or other arrangements. That type of negotiation of the best percentage of it and who on your team based off the contributions really goes into play there. So everyone needs to be upfront, honest, transparent about that situation. So a guy that comes in and does, help out with that last 10%, but if that last 10% is a banger and really helps out, hit them off with a bonus. But I wouldn't say all of a sudden you're entitled to an extra 5% of the proceeds of the sales or some crap like that. Now that's depending on the negotiation that you might need. That might be the type of person that's an absolute incredible coder who has a penchant for being able to get certain gameplay loops over the hill. If that's the type of thing you got a hold of and that's what you got to do, then hey, that's what you got to do. But more often than not, that's not the case. So just something to think about when you talk about your revenue splits, and then advancements and recoupment. That's the sticky part. Advancements and recoupment. Oh my God, you might as well call them glorified loans. For all I care, they're glorified loans. Um, advances are pretty much a just that, an advance on royalties intended to be made, and then you're going to pay that back with some interest on top of it. The music industry is notorious for this type of situation, where you will get an advance to do the project of whatever type of money, and with that money, you are in look to live off of it as well as make your project. So doing that, now some people get really savvy with this situation. There was one gentleman who had a record deal, um, who ended up incorporating a business that was a recording studio. So when he would go and bill the company or bill the record company, which was coming out of his budget, he was literally paying himself because he was recording at his own legitimate recording studio. So instead of going out and having that money go outward, he was actually having that dollar circulate. The digital era allows you to do things like this. So I would say that that's something to really think about and try to keep in consideration especially when it comes to games and digital distribution. For whatever reason, like I'm a big fanboy. I'm a purist at heart when it comes to like my media. I like my cartridges. I like being able to have to blow in the cartridges or put alcohol around it and slap it down to make sure that it works. I'm from that era. That's just what it is. But that being said, digital is digital, and digital era is king because it allowed us to open up um, the situation so that we were no longer fighting for space on Walmart shelves. You weren't having to, you know, fight for this particular date or stop the production so that the boxes could be printed and so that you could get the EPROMs programmed and set into the damn cartridges. I'm sorry, I lived through this stuff. So that was the first 10 years of my life in terms of setting up, working at Microprose and then making sure that we could pass certification for Nintendo and Sega systems as well as their cartridge-based systems for games like Civilization or I believe it was oh shoot, it was a helicopter game, Gunship, and there was another one called Airborne Ranger that never really came out, but that was interesting. And at that time, we also had, guess believe it or not, we had a IP. We had the Hasbro IP. We had rights to it because we had Star Trek at the time, and that was a Paramount. And for whatever reason, Paramount and Hasbro were connected, so we ended up turning Airborne Ranger into GI Joe. It was a whole thing. It was interesting, and we never sold a damn thing. I don't think we even released it when I think about it. But it happens like that sometimes. But you know, when you're thinking about your revenue sharing, your royalties, advancements, and recoupments, a lot of that stuff comes into play because all of your digital stuff comes into it. So, just trying to bring all of that back in, even though I know I like to ramble sometimes off it, all kind of ties into one another. Like those advancements, like they be careful with those. They can be know how they're recouped. Sometimes publisher recoup these from sales before the developer sees any profits. So that's another one. And then you have those other little nasty tidbits where it'll be like, oh yeah, your game has to have at least an 85 rating on Metacritic or some crap like that. So all of a sudden nobody gets their bonuses because Metacritic got 83 and not 85. And I've seen that's happened, which is some bullshit. That type of thing has to stop. That type of thing needs to be looked at when you're in the middle of your negotiation, when you're starting with these companies that are going to be putting out or helping you put out your game. You really, really have to take that consideration. And another thing to think about is the payment schedule. How is that going to be? How's that remittance going to be paid out to the company, as well as what type of milestones, upfront payments, and deliveries? Like for instance, for me, a couple years ago, I did a few videos for digital tutors. One of those videos happens to be about MakerBots and how to use them after doing a quick concept sketch in ZBrush. So I went and did a video. Roughly, they want their videos to be around 2 hours for whatever reason, but I struggled trying to make a MakerBot how to do this type of stuff with a 2 hour video. What ended up happening is I roughly had a 45-minute video, and it ended up selling incredibly well. Now, part of the negotiation was $2,000 up front to do the job, and then there were royalties that were paid out on the back end of it. Now, within that fine print of the royalties, it was a diminishing return on said royalty. So even though I would have a certain amortization set up, meaning a scheduled dates of being paid out, eventually the percentage of such payouts would diminish over the course of years. Now, the funny thing that happened with this one is that during the COVID pandemic, there was a spike in viewership of over 75%. So out of nowhere, I started getting these checks for 40 and $50. But when I looked at the percentage on diminishing returns, I was missing out on a couple hundred, and in one instance, over $1,000 for one payout that would have been said had that negotiating contract been one that was pretty much, uh, as they put it, perpetual, or in perpetuity. That was not the case. So you had to move on from that one. But those are the type of things that you have to look for. Always look at the fine print of those type of things. Now, also, when you're talking about things to consider in negotiation, you got your creative control, your artistic, and your design. Depending on who you're working with, like with Hollywood, they talk about notes and whether or not are you willing to take notes on a certain project. And also, it pretty much boils down to who is putting up the money for the project to be done. Whoever's doing that pretty much has the control on who does the notes. And so you can negotiate that to a point, but there's also the level of who's paying for this at the end of the day, and how much are they willing to go back and forth and roll the dice that a certain hunch for someone that's not paying for it is actually right. So that's something that can be a bit of a tightrope to walk. So just be careful on that one. Just think about. Let's see. Yeah, approval process. Yeah, that's another thing. Clarifying who has the final say in creative changes. You definitely want to have that type of thing thought out and explained and taught to and made clear to everyone. Clearly, who has the final say. Never want to change that out. And then you have things like scope and timeline. Like I was saying before, talking about making deliverables. Things like making sure that you hit your shelf space. That's been a battle before on certain titles that I've worked on, where we had to get it out at a certain group or at a certain quality level because that's when we had the opportunity to have that shelf space. And if it's not there at the time that Walmart needs it, that's a problem. So you really don't want to miss those dates because you never get an opportunity to do it again if you miss it. Um, so some things to think about on that is your development schedule, how long it's going to take, your Q&A, timeline of production. Make sure that release aligns with the team's capabilities. So, really don't want to obviously make an MMO when you guys are more suited to make things like Tetris. That doesn't line up. You want to make sure that those type of things make sense. You don't want to be locked into an overly ambitious deadline either. So there is a certain thing of, oh my God, what are you thinking here? So you really want to try to have some control on that end as well, because there is a certain thing of with like that's how you get into like crunch. That's how you get into situations where you don't or can't have uh, the actual gameplay loop that you had desired because you've just gone into the woods in terms of exactly how much or what you want to actually get done. Okay, so the last one I'll talk about here before we take the break will be about distribution and marketing. So marketing support and who's going to control that, who's going to help promote the game, and if so, how is it going to be promoted? For instance, we at OVFX, we've got this little side game that I talk about from time to time. This little beat 'em up that we're working on. And we've been talking with Sony, and we were in talks back and forth. And Trevor pretty much outright asked him, do you guys want to pay for any development of this? And they were like, "Oh, absolutely not. However, we do encourage you by all means to actually make the game. And if you make said game, we will give you front store coverage or front store visibility for the first month and a half of the title, free for that end. Now there is a setup in terms of like if you're on the Sony store and then split of different profits, but in terms of actually having advertisement on the Sony PlayStation store for free of charge, that's, hey, they have a platform that they can take advantage of that doesn't cost them anything, that gets out to all of their um, users. So it benefits us for us to have a title that's going to cost us less than $250,000 to make at roughly $30 a pop, to have as much exposure as possible on something like that, and so pretty much be sold as like a value title, um, somewhat in the vein of Helldivers 2, but on those type of lines. And I really do think that games are going to start to go back to those type of experiences instead of everything being a AAA title that's supposed to take years and years off of your life. Um, I think we're going to see a little bit of a bounce back in that. So marketing support is something to think about. Platforms and territories. Which consoles you're going to be working on? Is it mobile? What are your great geographic regions? What types of localization are you going to have to do? Uh, Regions of the game to be distributed in, and where the additional fees apply for certain territories. Like for instance, you're looking at how Epic is fighting with the United States in terms of having their Unreal Engine tools or projects or programs on American iPhones or I think it's iPhones. Yeah, because I don't think they're running on Androids. I'm not sure of that one, but nevertheless, Epic's been in a real big heated battle with Apple of about rights and who gets rights to what. In fact, I think what I'll do is I'll post a talk and some other information that I found on the situation. I found it quite fascinating, in fact, about it. Now, the cool thing about it is that in England, Epic is now able to run iPhone. Run Unreal Engine on iPhone tools without having to work with the monetization standards that Apple has already put up. So that point has been put in. It's the United States has been the big problem here. So I'll send some information on that also. So I'll wrap up this part here, and we'll continue with those last few steps. And I'll see you in a bit.